Okay, so today we are going to finish our discussion of lexical definitions, and then we will proceed to the next sections. Let's see, almost. No, not quite. Okay, so today will be session number 102006. That's 102006. All right, now that I've got all that set up, how's it going? Chapter 3 so far. Definitions, words. Yeah. How are you doing on the homework? Homework easy, hard? How's it going? Some thumbs up, few nods, some in between. I trust the in-betweens more than I trust all the hearty thumbs up, and the nods, the half nods I'm probably most worried about. Because the half nod can mean, yes, I'm listening, or yes, I got it. Or I'm kind of confused, but I'm trying to be cooperative and go along. And I'm trying to ask a question. So, which is why we do the clicker stuff, because the clicker stuff tells me where people are really at. And we all need that reality check sooner rather than later. I'd rather have that reality check in class than on the exam. Any questions on the schedule, on the logistics? Especially on quiet classes. Well, burned. It's President's Day. It's unpatriotic for us to have class. I'm sorry for that. Used to be we didn't celebrate any Monday holidays. All right. Well, let's go back to this one. We talked about lie equals false statement. And remember, the question here that we ask is always, what is the most serious problem with the definition that's offered here? So the definition is the second half of the claim. And the question is it too broad? Is it too narrow? Is it too vague? Is it a wrong tone, or is it circular? Now, it's possible that there's more than one thing wrong with some of these, because there can be more than one thing wrong with a proposed definition. My claim is that false statement is definitely too narrow a category for the claim lie. And here's why. It's because there are lots of claims or statements that we might make that are false that aren't actually lies. So I might claim, or the weatherman might claim, it will snow tomorrow. And he might be wrong about that. Is that a lie? Probably not. There are lots of accidentally false things, or we just don't know, or we're guessing. There are a lot of claims that people make that turn out to be false that they thought were true. So none of those are lies. So, so if we were to draw the circles, lying is a smaller part of a much bigger category of false statements. And since false statements is so much bigger, did I use the wrong term? Did I say this was too narrow? Yeah, you see when it looks like that, this is much bigger, and that makes it too broad, because there's lots of things that turn out to be false that aren't actually lies. It's only lies if I'm trying to trick you in some way. It's definitely not circular. For it to be circular, it would be something like a lie is a lying statement. Again, it has to recycle an important portion of the definition. Yeah. Now, if it were to, now you could try to argue there might be something that's a lie that's not a statement. Maybe you can lie with gestures somehow. I mean, so maybe you could try to claim it doesn't have to be a statement, and that would be an instance where it's a little too narrow. But the most serious problem is that there are lots of things that are false statements that are not lies, and that therefore this is broad, much broader. False statements is much broader than the categories of lies. All right, so let's try a couple more. Adolescent. What's wrong with defining an adolescent as a person between 9 and 19? Is the category too broad, too narrow, too vague, too wrong tone, or circular? Software is taking a while to do very basic division. All right, no, go back there. All right, let's try this one again. All right, let's try, send me your responses again here. There we go. Yeah, so adolescent is a stage of development. Now let's assume we're talking about humans here. It was not explicit that we're only talking about humans here, but I think that's a safe enough inference. Now this one, there might be multiple problems with, because adolescents are people who are going through this stage of development between childhood and adulthood. And the majority vote here was that it was too narrow. The idea being that it needs to be bigger than that. And that makes sense because 9 through 19. I mean, some people hit adolescence when? It's possible to get adolescence when you're 8. Get your growth spurt a little early, get those sweat glands a little early, these sorts of things. So that happens. So there are, again, I drew the diagram wrong. So adolescence is this big circle. Most adolescents are indeed between 9 and 19. But you might have an 8-year-old adolescent. If we're talking about adolescence in an emotional sense, there are people does everyone automatically move on to an adult mentality at the age of 20? No. We have people who are 20 whose brains aren't fully developed as adults who are certainly acting like adolescents. Whether or not we can call people who are like 30 and 40 who just have immature attitudes adolescents is probably not correct. But yeah, that's definitely too narrow. It's not vague. Do we all know what it looks like to have a person who's between 9 and 19? That's pretty clear. So I don't think vague is a great answer for this. Yeah, is there too broad? It's maybe. I mean, maybe you could make a case that you'd have an unusual case where somebody's fully mature, no longer an adolescent at 18. A young adult or something. But yeah, the biggest problem there is going to be the too narrow, as most of you got. Okay, how about this? God should be defined as object of ultimate concern. Okay. Yeah, I agree with the plurality view there. So look, the main problem is this. When we talk about the idea of God, we all kind of know what we're talking about. We're talking about, infinite cosmic power, creator, invisible, omniscient, omnipotent, this kind of stuff. Many people associate it with those Bible stories. You don't have to, though. But when we talk about God, most people, at least in our culture, have we can settle on, we know what we're talking about. What the hell is an object of ultimate concern? Can somebody define object of ultimate concern for me? I mean, that is that's a much vaguer term than the term God. Now, this comes from a corner of philosophy and theology that tries to claim that, nobody's really an atheist because everyone has an object of ultimate concern, and whatever that object of ultimate concern is really your God. So if you are really into Star Wars and have seen the original trilogy like 50 times, then Star Wars is your God. But that's not good. I mean, you're equivocating if you do that. I mean, that's you're not talking about that idea of the invisible, all-powerful, all-knowing creator, just person. So yeah, I'd say that's too vague. Again, wrong tone's not really right. Wrong tone's not really the problem here. It's not like we shifted from something really good to really bad. I mean, I suppose God is really a very positive term, and ultimate concern maybe a little less so. But that's not a really stark idea. Because the second category is too vague, you're not really sure whether or not it's too broad or too narrow, which is probably why we also got those answers. So if you're really struggling to say, is it too broad, is it too narrow, is it kind of both? Maybe it actually is too vague because you don't really know what the second idea is. So that's one of the keys for identifying too vague. It doesn't clearly communicate and is quite different. All right, metaphysics equals any sleep-inducing subject. Metaphysics is, of course, the most abstract and foundational corner of philosophy, where we learn that form is primary before matter, and that the ultimate ground of reality might be substance or something along those lines. Whether or not cause and effect really exists. Unfortunately, metaphysics is even more boring than it sounds, which is the joke here. Yeah, okay. So metaphysics is so what are the things that are sort of so boring that they put you to sleep? Metaphysics might be one of them. But is that the only topic that's super boring? Maybe not. Probably like advanced calculus. Really dull stuff. Counting. I'm really good at math, but I did not become a math professor because I could not stay awake with this stuff. Or maybe maybe there's some literature you really don't like. Leviticus. Even if you're like really religious, Leviticus is like really dull stuff. The ancient leprosy laws and cleanliness laws. I mean, not really the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night. So there's lots of things that are sleep-inducing that are probably not metaphysics. So again, that's obviously too broad. And there are probably, again, I think that's the best answer. I think that's the right answer if I were to ask this. I mean, it is probably also too narrow because you know what? Some nerds like me, I might be really into metaphysics. I might think it's the coolest thing ever to understand the fabric of reality. That might not put me to sleep. Yeah, even I'm not there, but got to try sometimes. All right, good is of positive value. So how is the definition of positive value? What's wrong with that as a definition for good? Yeah, as the definitions go, I think that this is the best of the definitions we've seen so far, I think. Because good is actually vague unless you connect it to a type of thing modified by good. Are we talking about morally good? Are we talking about good buildings, good art, good people, good athletes? I mean, these are all very different kinds of good things. So the word good on its own is actually notoriously vague. It's not circular. I mean, we didn't say good of good value. That's what it would be to be circular, or to say positivity means of positive value. So I don't know why people are clicking circular. Is it too vague? It might be too vague. I mean, too broad or too vague. Either of those seem plausible. Again, I suspect people who clicked too broad were thinking that of positive value. Yeah, I mean, good doesn't just have to do with value, like moral values. It can be, any positive quality. So Pete Rose is a good baseball player, even if he was immoral and gambled illegitimately on games that he played in. So again, good doesn't equal morally good, which might be more implied by the second claim there. Human beings. We are featherless bipeds. Perhaps the worst definition of human in history. All right. Yeah, too broad. So if we say it's too broad, what we're saying is that there are things other than humans that are featherless bipeds. What are some things that are humans? What are some things that are featherless bipeds that are not humans? Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I mean, I'm not quite sure of all the scientific nuances of kangaroos, but they stand up on 2 feet. Chimpanzees, yeah, that's right. That's right. They don't have feathers. Yeah, so there are things that are featherless bipeds that are not humans. Therefore, the category featherless bipeds is too broad. Again, there's nothing wrong with the tone there. I mean, it's not like I hate featherless bipeds. That's, human being isn't the most positive way to describe us. All right, I know claim P means I believe claim P. I know that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will win the Super Bowl next year. Is the same thing as I believe that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will win the Super Bowl next year. Yeah, I mean, this is certainly looking more circular. I mean, we've got the I that P pattern recurring, so that's a decent answer. Also, belief is a much broader category than knowledge, because there's lots of things I believe and that you believe that probably will turn out to be false. And knowledge is a success term that means that means in part that we're correct in believing that. So if I know that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will win the Super Bowl next year and they don't, I believed it, but I did not know it. So that second category is also too broad. Nothing wrong with the tone. Knowledge and belief aren't really vague. Everything that I know is also something I believe, so it's not really too narrow. So broad or circular are by far the best answers of that. How about this? I know claim P means I believe claim P, and claim P is actually true. Yeah, so again, we've got some circularity because it's repeating a lot of the same pattern. So is that too narrow? Are there things that we know that that don't fit into the category of things that are believed and are true? Really what's at stake here is this. The question is there some third thing that has to be the case for us to say that we know something? In philosophy, almost everyone says, well, something that's knowledge, it's belief, it has to be true, and maybe you need to have like evidence for it being true. So if you have a belief that's just kind of based on a lucky guess and it turns out to be true, there's a debate as to whether or not that is supposed to be knowledge. So actually, I won't ask you this one on the test because this one's too technical and frankly too far in game in philosophy debates. But yeah, they're basically trying to ask whether there's a third thing that has to be the case for you to have knowledge. It has to be something you believe, something that's true, and something that is you have evidence for in some way. So for example, if I just say, I think what's a really bad team? I think the New York Giants will win the Super Bowl next year. How do you know? Well, they've got the best helmets. You know, that's not really a good reason for believing that. So, and let's say they recruit like they make three great trades over the offseason, and they do actually somehow magically win next year. They get in on Tom Brady's deal with the devil or something, and they win. Did I know that the Giants were going to win, or was it just kind of a lucky guess? And a lot of us don't think lucky guesses should count as knowledge. So that's really what's at stake there. And if there is a third category, a third thing here, then this is narrower than this. There are things that are, things that are knowledge that aren't just that. All right, chair. Here, let's get back to something a little more relevant to you. Chair. Chair's what you sit on. Too broad, too narrow, wrong tone, circular, vague. Good. Yeah, there's lots of things we all sit on, and there aren't chairs, right? So you can sit on a bed, you can sit on the floor. So there's lots of things. So what you sit on is way too broad of a category. And so that's too broad is definitely the most serious problem. And of course, some of us don't use chairs to sit on. We hang our laundry on them, right? Or we can prop up books, or maybe we're watching our iPad and we prop them up on a chair or something. True equals believed. All right, so here again, belief is a much larger category than things that are true. There are some things I believe that are false, but there are also things that are true that I don't believe. So it's both too broad and too narrow. So actually, vague is not a bad definition, not a bad diagnosis there, even though I think we all kind of more or less know what belief is. All right, I think we need to move on. We've got other things we want to cover today. There we go. All right, let's cover some things from sections 3 and 4. 3.3 and 3.4. All right, so the previous section was about lexical definitions. Remember, lexical definitions show how we currently use words and are sort of broad guidelines within our culture on how where the contours of those concepts go. Stipulative definitions, in contrast, are definitions that we come up with, and they are not lexical definitions. We're not claiming they're the same as the way everybody in the culture uses the word. But especially for an experiment or for a system of logic or something, sometimes we need to limit our use of a word. So we've already given you logical definitions, stipulative definitions within logic for words like valid, argument, soundness, which were not the same way that we usually use our words. But here's one. Here's the way I use the expression, a good movie. It's a movie with at least 3 action scenes that can be analyzed on a deeper level and make Silverman laugh at least 3 times. You may know I teach the philosophy in the movies class, and I always try to use good movies for that class. And that's my stipulative definition. That may not be your definition. That may not be the definition used more broadly in the culture. A clarifying definition is a stipulative definition that seeks to clarify or narrow our use of a word. Again, words like good, notoriously vague. Words like love, notoriously vague. Words like beautiful, words like justice. All the foundational terms can be debated and are vague at points. So a kind of stipulative definition is a clarifying definition that seeks to narrow it. All right, some guidelines for stipulative definitions. We want to use clear terms that our reader, that the people we're engaging with will understand. We want to avoid circularity. Defining terms in light of themselves or in light of their root words is not helpful. The goal is to paraphrase the defined term and show how the person defining the term will use the term, and hopefully aid our understanding of the subject. So some guidelines for good stipulative definitions. Here's another sort of puzzle about definitions and problems with definitions. If you've paid attention to the way definitions work, a lot of definitions are kind of circular, but in a bigger sense. In other words, you look up term A and it's defined as term B. Then you look up term B and it's defined as term C. The term C is defined as term A. So all you have is this internal circularity between 3 things. So let's say I want to find the word justice, and we define justice as fairness, and we define fairness as equality, and then we define equality as justice. You see the problem? So each immediate definition isn't circular, but when you sort of trace the conceptual map, you take it a step further, and it turns out we're going in circles. So there's a famous article in philosophy by a Princeton professor, "Justice is fairness," which I want to say, gee, thanks. I was confused before, and now I'm still confused, because fairness is every bit as vague a term as justice is. Equality, I think, is a little bit better. Here's this work. Here's how this works with a word I write books about: love. So the danger with love is you can end up again with a conceptual map that looks something like this. To love means to care for others in an unselfish way. But to care for others in an unselfish way means to have a benevolent attitude. But benevolence means to be altruistic, and altruistic means to value others as ourselves. And of course, to value others as ourselves means to love them. I mean, it's better, it's a bigger circle, and maybe with each step you sort of learn a little bit in the nuance, but still it gets very tricky. Now, one way to avoid circularity is to try to list specific, particular examples of the phenomenon, and try to start there instead of just defining words in terms of other words that ultimately circle back on themselves. So I could say, love, like Romeo and Juliet, like I will die if we can't be together. By the way, that sounds a lot like dysfunction rather than love, but people like that story for some reason. Or love, like Mother Teresa, like go get the dying poor off the streets and be next to them in their moment of pain. Or Martin Luther King or Gandhi or whoever your hero this week happens to be. So you can just try to list examples of the phenomenon that you are trying to explain, and that is one strategy for preventing this sort of conceptual circle. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about two kinds of stipulative definitions. We're going to talk about logical positivism, and we're going to talk about pragmatism. Now, logical positivism is a kind of approach to definitions that is popular in science. And the goal is to define terms by observable, repeatable tests. So the meaning of a definition requires that there be an empirical test to determine whether or not something fits that definition. And if there's no way to test a statement, then that statement has no meaning. In contrast, pragmatic definitions ask whether the concept makes a practical difference in life, whether or not the concept is verifiable. Let me give an example of something that is not verifiable, but which makes a huge pragmatic difference so that you can see the difference between the two. The concept of free will. Debated a lot by philosophers. Most of us has come to the conclusion that it's sort of unresolvable, not something that can really be proven one way or the other in the bigger picture. So it won't fit the definition of a good definition according to logical positivism. It won't be meaningful. But pragmatically, it turns out to be very important to believe that you have free will. If you don't believe that you have free will, it will rob your life of a certain kind of meaningfulness. And meaningfulness is important. So people who believe they have free will have better lives than people who don't believe that they have free will. So whether or not we can prove it, it makes an important practical difference. I chose Coke instead of Pepsi this morning again. Hopefully I freely chose that. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm just fooled by all the advertising budget. All right, let's take out our clickers. Let's get some practice. Oh, yeah, there we go. So let's talk about logical positivism. Is there an empirical test that we could use or come up with to define these ideas? So here's the idea. Can we verify whether or not it's cold outside? Yeah, that's meaningful. I mean, we have to define the word cold. We have to say it means, whether or not it's under 40 degrees or whether or not people grab a jacket or something. But it's meaningful, and then we can observe. Note that we're doing better than 100% here. We have 101% of people participating. I'm very proud of the 101%. That clock is fast. Is that a meaningful claim or not a meaningful claim? Yeah, that's a meaningful claim. You need to compare it to whatever it is we use for our standard of time. I trust my phone. But there are like official atomic clocks or clocks based on the astronomer's measurements that determine things to the minute. And if our clock is ahead of that set expected standard, we refer to it as fast. So it's a meaningful claim. And if your clocks are fast, what's going to happen? You're going to start showing up places before other people are there, and you're going to think it's weird. So it will, there are ways to test this. It does have a difference to your life. All right, now think about this one. Is it meaningful to say there are 5-foot-long blue ants in your bedroom? Is it meaningful to say there are 5-foot-long blue ants in your bedroom? Yes, it's meaningful. It's meaningful. It's false and it's silly, but it's meaningful. What's the test? The test is we go to our bedroom, we open our eyes, and using the superpower of sight, we look around and see, are there indeed ants that are 5 foot long and blue in our bedroom? And if they're not, then it is meaningful but false. And if there are, it is meaningful but true. Good. Often people get this one wrong. So I'm glad to see that 82% got this one right. That is promising. Very good. Oh, form is metaphysically prior to matter, as the great philosopher Aristotle says. Is that a meaningful claim or not a meaningful claim? All right. This is the sort of thing that logical positivists were trying to get rid of. They didn't like claims like this. So the thing that makes it not meaningful is this. What is the test? How can I verify and us all come to an agreement on whether or not form is metaphysically prior to matter? I mean, it's not like I can get my formatter out and like measure form to see if it's metaphysically heavier than matter or not. I mean, there's no such thing. So they were trying to get rid of stuff like this. This is the sort of thing that motivates logical positivists. At noon, which will happen very soon, all lengths, distances, and velocities in the universe will double. Yes? The idea is it's meaningful if it's empirically testable, which is similar to, but not really quite the same thing as objective. So you're close. You're close. So the idea is they wanted these sorts of things to be everything to be testable in a lab, and anything that didn't fit the definition were things that were not testable in the lab. Yeah. And then on Wednesday, I'll show you how their view is completely self-refuting. All right. So at noon, so shortly, watch out for this in about right after you leave class. All lengths, distances, and velocities in the universe will double. Huh. I don't know what you thought about this. The correct answer is that it was not a meaningful thing. And here's why. If length double, but speed doubles, what's going to happen? Will it take you longer to get places? Basically, everything will double relative to itself, including your body and the speed at which your body travels. And everything will seem exactly the same. So if the room doubles, but my measuring stick doubles, the room will be exactly the same number of measuring sticks as it was before. Now, the other way, so length is one way to measure it, but you can also measure distance and how long it takes to get places. But if velocities double as well, then you're taking away that ability as well. So this is going for having some fun with us. This would not be a meaningful plan. The only difference it might make is, the numbers we use to refer to everything would double. But it would take you just as long to get places. Everything would be the same size relative to every other thing. So other than the fact that the numbers you use to refer to everything would double, nothing else would change. So therefore, it would not be meaningful, according to logical property. Yes? Yeah, then it would be meaningful because then it would take you twice as long to get places because your speed wouldn't. Yeah, no, I think if velocity does double, there's going to be some way to use velocity to tell the difference between the two scenarios. All right, we'll pick this back up next time. I should mention this is a defunct way of thinking in philosophy for reasons I will reveal to you in our next surprising class. Also, read ahead to the next section. Thank you very much.